I'll just kick
The
us
red
off.
thing,
Yeah,
now you're
yeah.
live.
First.
We are live, and it is January 30th in Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And we are joined by Migrant Justice, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. My name is Marita Canedo. I'm part of the Migrant Justice team, and I coordinate the Milk with Dignity program. And I have to say that having this funding and working with the state for farm worker housing has been something that we've been putting a lot of effort to make it possible. And the takeaways is that, well, the program is good, but the fundings are not enough, and the time that it takes for farmers to get funding and have everything done, it's too long. So just to give you some takeaways from this year that we've been working on this, the Milk with Dignity Standards Council had to work a lot on bringing more funding for housing, because what the farmers are receiving is not enough. It's kind of less than 50% of what is needed for a new housing.
Okay.
Sorry, less than 50%.
Yes.
Of the
Of the
proposal.
cost
of funding.
of getting a new housing unit for a farm, for farm workers. So the Standards Council has recruited, donors, and also the one-time funding from the COVID relief, the APRA. That has been helpful, but we know it's just one time. That is not gonna happen again. So under the program, there's still 3 farms waiting to get all the funding, and they are still on all the paperwork. Extra costs that come when you have the house unit, you have the plan, and then extra costs about making it livable, having all the permits for farm workers to live there. And also the Standards Council have helped in all these conversations about teaching the new tenants how the new house and the energy works, and being sure that the owner is not making other deals about restrictions or things that are not under the tenant law. So a lot of effort from our team to be sure to monitor that things are happening.
Are there some patterns you're seeing that we should be aware of in that regard, things that the state should help you with?
So the patterns is the length of how farmers get into this money and how the enforcement mechanism happens.
I think it would be helpful for you to walk through. I mean, we're talking about building homes for migrant workers on farms. The farmer has to apply to enter into this program.
Yes.
So if you could walk us through and then the farmer owns, if it's on their property, the farmer, he or she owns the house.
Yes, and just to clarify, the housing won't only be for immigrant farm workers, it's for any farm worker.
For any
that
farm.
the farm is
Which is
hiring.
great. Every farm
And
needs
is
housing for farm
ag
workers.
administering this, or
Is who?
the Agency of Agriculture?
Who's
No.
overseeing, who's it going through?
So VHCB got the money. They are working through CHT to give the funds, to distribute the funds, get the applications, figure out who's getting the funds, what are the needs, how much are they getting. So farmers apply. We know the farmers are really busy, so also the Standards Council help them go through all the application and the requirements and all that. Once they are approved, they have to show what is the plan.
Right.
And who are they gonna contract to do all the work? Where is it coming? And then get all the permits and get everything for it. So I can walk you through some rough things an example of a new housing.
Yes.
It's already done and habitable.
Oh, good. So we have some successes.
Yes.
Some have been built. Right.
Yes, so one.
And how much money had we put aside? I've forgotten what we had.
I don't want to misspeak as well.
Allocated.
So as far as I remember,
Just identify yourself.
Will Lambeck with Migrant Justice. Thank you. And good morning, committee. So there have been 2 rounds of appropriations from the legislature to VHCB, and as far as I know, the legislature did not specifically earmark how much, but said that among the intended
Right.
destinations for this funding should be farm worker housing.
So we've given them 50 million
Yeah.
or more.
Yeah.
So,
And
okay.
it's been.
So it's up to them to,
Yeah,
to
and
decide.
they have set aside over the 2 rounds about 3 million.
Okay.
Yeah,
And when you say 2 rounds, that's 2 years, right?
2 times of 4 applications, so it was the first round and then the second round, but it wasn't 2 years, we could say
it
a
was
year and a
22 and
half.
23,
Yeah,
or earlier.
Asking about when the legislature appropriated the
What years, that was in last year's budget and the year before, I believe.
Yes, and the $50 million that the chairwoman referred to, I think that was in the budget adjustment that happened at the beginning of last session, so I guess it would have been 2022
Right.
money.
Right.
so just to walk you through this one successful house, the total cost was 500,000. The funding that came from the state was 120,000. From there, they have this one-time community recovery revitalization program that it was 95,000. And then the Standards Council have been able to raise private funding around 120,000 too, so kind of the same amount that they were getting from the state, from different organizations. And also, the farms that are under the program receive a premium from the company that is now Ben & Jerry's. So they have been able to use that funding also to put it on housing,
Okay.
which.
So Milk with Dignity is helping in this situation.
Yes.
But they're not one of those 2 grants, 95 or 120. Is that Milk with Dignity money? No.
No, they have been funding that and getting like private funding raised, helping with this one-time community recovery revitalization program is APRA money.
Oh, the ARPA,
ARPA,
right.
Uh-huh. And then because the farms receive some premium from the company to be in compliance with housing, also the farms can get, use that money they are already getting from the program to put it in the housing. So we know that the construction of the house was only possible because of this one-time federal funding, the fundraising efforts from the Milk with Dignity program, and that it wasn't enough of what the state was able to give for the construction. Also, all the support that I was sharing of the Standards Council to get the workers moving in, mediation with the agreements about, how to use the house, wear and tear, tenant and rights, all that. Yes.
May I just ask, so how big of a house and how many people were, are able to live there?
Yes, so I have that
Please.
information here.
And it's, so 500,000 was the cost of the housing?
Yes.
That's a
And what
lot of
is,
money.
how is it made? Is it prefab? Is it, made on site?
Yeah, it's a Zem house, which is,
Is it the
Zero
zero
energy.
energy?
zero energy out of there, yeah.
Is it,
So it's a modular house.
Yeah.
well, I wonder,
yeah.
is it one of the Titan homes by any chance?
No, it's a 5-bedroom Zem unit.
So it's a 5-bedroom, 3-bath? So that, I think that might be
For
the,
7 people.
is that what it was? 5-bedroom, 3-bath?
You could ask the HCD.
Okay.
But that's right. Titan isn't the name we're familiar with, but I think we're probably talking about the same unit.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I had understood they were a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I just want to note, because of timing, I've asked Magali to reschedule Elizabeth Bridgewater.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
That
so
helps.
this unit helps 6 dairy farm workers in the toddler. So there's a toddler there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there are other success on their way, because we know that some other farms in the report have been approved to get the funding, but it's still on the paperwork, still updating if they have the contracts and the other funding that they need, because again, only what comes from the state is not enough.
So they were short 160. How did they make up the 160?
So Milk with Dignity Standards Council have been privately, funding that with private donors, with programs, fundraising, because they have this importance work that brings, fair housing for workers. So they help the farmer go through all their applications, or the Standards Council themselves, and then distribute the money.
Right, but what you discussed was
Yeah.
money up to $340,000. So I'm
Right.
just wondering, what's the farmer's skin in the game? I assume the farmer puts up something other than just the land.
Yeah, so the remaining 155 or 160 is paid for by the farm owner with the
Okay.
support from the Milk with Dignity premium money that they receive from Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah,
Oh, I see, that's the premium, right?
that's the
That's
thing.
Right, okay.
So that, again, just sort of,
So with help
yeah,
from,
120 from the state, 95 from the feds, 120 in private funding raised
Right.
through the Milk with Dignity program, and then the remaining 155 from the farm with the support of the premium.
Yeah. And this is neither here nor there, but some executives from Hannaford wanted to meet with myself and the chair of agriculture. So of course we met with them, and I said, I can't force you into any programs, but you should be funding housing. So while that might not be exactly what would be desired, because they'd be participants and held to a higher standard, we should be asking them to help fund some of this. So, they are very open to how they can make financial contributions to show their support.
so for the next house,
Yes,
we have a donor. Hopefully
I
lined
will
up.
email.
Yeah, and it might be easy for Hannaford to say yes to that, because
Mhm.
one-time donation
Right,
is not
right.
something that is enforceable,
Yeah.
and it really brings real change that we are looking for, because even having the program implemented with managers, we've seen just one house built.
Yeah.
And part of it is the process that you asked me to walk through, having VHCB deciding how much money of this, how much of these units are gonna go to farm worker housing
Right.
is one issue, because they are not listening the real need and the crisis that is for farm worker housing. And then having CHT not having a strong enforcement mechanism or follow-up that
Okay.
we don't know about, or we hear from the workers themselves and the farmers themselves that what is the problem and how difficult it is to go through a process to apply for something, even that it's a great program, it still has their challenges. And we need to really find this an easy way, not get tangled into, is this for the farmer? It's like, it's really brings up the farmers that we want to support in our state.
We we have some conversations coming up with the Land Access and Opportunity Board, which falls under the HCB. So I'll raise this as an agenda item as well. Maybe one more question, and then we should get to the other proposal, I think.
Yeah, well, we should get to the
Oh, you're ready to
proposals
get.
up. Yeah, but
Okay.
my question is, do you have, because the data isn't in here, do you have data on how many homes are needed? How many people are in less than standard, reasonable living condition? How many farm workers are in less than optimal working housing? So how many, what's the scale of the need? That's not in here.
I love
And
your
that would help
question.
us as we sell this to our colleagues.
Yeah.
No, I love your question, because under the program, we can have accurate data, because those farms are constantly monitored and audited once a year. Outside of the program, we have some data that this year we're gonna start a new survey about asking us specific questions, but we have a rough data about, around all these years, about how many people are living, above the barn.
Yeah.
Or in an office,
So
without bathroom.
that would be very helpful, because one of our jobs is we have to sell it to our colleagues and to the appropriations committee. The other thing is, how many counties are you looking at? Addison, Franklin, Chittenden, it would be helpful to know also the counties that you have the
Excellent.
biggest challenges in.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Franklin, Orleans, Addison, the
Yeah.
islands.
Yeah,
So
but
that would
there-
be helpful
yeah.
for us.
But there is substandard farmer housing in every county of the state.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And but that would just be helpful. for us.
Yes.
Sure.
So, much earlier, I think a week or so ago, this was on our desks. If you can't find it, this is the proposal that Migrant Justice sent us for language requested in the deed home.
And just very, very briefly before, we switch to that, just, we wanted to show the committee, some of the photos of the new house that was
Okay,
constructed.
good.
So this is the unit under construction. This is the farm workers and their families staying in front of the new house.
So it's two families living there?
It's 6 workers, and 1 toddler, and there are sort of 2 family units and then 2 single men in the house together. And this is the kitchen. This is
So it's a communal kitchen?
communal
Yeah.
kitchen, a woman named Hanya. And then just to give a sort of comparison shot, this is the kitchen
Wow.
she was in prior to moving into the new house. To get a sense of sort of what houses tend to look like, and then here's what we can accomplish together and with more support from the state.
Right.
And yeah, it's really gratifying to be able to show this. We had invited Hanya and her coworkers to try to zoom in today. They weren't able to, but they're aware that we're talking about the house with you all today, and they're very proud. And when we were there taking these photos, and she just sort of looking at her child playing in the house, remarked, and like what a different life she's going to have growing up in this quality housing as opposed to the previous house where workers were sleeping in common space with just a curtain blocking off their bed and exposed wiring and
So that kind of detail is helpful to have?
yeah.
What kind of
Very
conditions people are living in? What, all the things I just said.
But thank you for filling a huge gap that was left
Huge.
in what we, our intention and what is happening. So we'll be following up on that.
Yeah. So progress underway, and
Right.
it's been
But
possible
slow.
because of really, gargantuan efforts from the farm workers themselves through the Milk with Dignity program and bridging this funding and remarkably, raising over $100,000 in private funds to supplement the state and the farm. But to get into the legislative proposal this year, and it's a little bit different than farm worker housing, but connected because one of the reasons why farm worker housing is so substandard is because workers have very limited housing options for non-employer provided housing. And that's why farm workers and other immigrants in the state are forced into looking for work that has housing attached because they have a great difficulty accessing housing on the open rental market. This has been true for agriculture workers for many years. And now we're seeing it increasingly in construction, in restaurants, in hospitality. When employers are hiring immigrant workers, almost invariably, they are providing them with housing. And that leads often to substandard housing, and it leads to really intense power imbalances where if you're a worker and you are suffering labor abuse, if you speak out, you're worried about retaliation, not only losing a job, but all of a sudden being homeless as well. We are hoping that the committee take up a language which would increase access to housing for immigrant families in the rental market. And we propose to do that through 2 means. One would be to define immigration status as a protected class in the Vermont Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act. This is something that in various ways other states have done. We provide some examples from New York and California. Right now, if you are applying for housing and you're told, we don't want to give housing to quote unquote illegals or undocumented people, that's not necessarily discriminatory. You might be able to say, okay, well, there's national origin discrimination or there's racial discrimination. Those are protected classes, but it would be an uphill battle. So just like California and New York, we would propose defining immigration status as a protected class.
So California and New York have already done that?
That's right, yeah, and those citations are in the paper that you have there at the bottom of the first page.
Got it.
And their language is a little bit different.
Haven't gotten that far.
No, fine. Apologies. So the language is within there. It's quite straightforward, just adding actual or perceived citizenship and immigration status, and then defining it in the definition section of that statute. And then the second piece, which is on your back page, would be adding language to Title IX, Chapter 137, saying that a landlord shall not request nor require a social security number, and that they should be able to accept alternative forms of identification and any government-issued document. What we've been seeing as migrant justice, when people are trying to apply for housing during the rental process, invariably they're asked for a social security number, and that's the stop point right there, where they say, okay, I guess I can't go forward, and so then have to look for employer provided housing. We understand that the intent of requesting a social security number isn't necessarily discriminatory, and the reason for most often that it happens is that landlords are performing credit checks. One can perform a credit check without a social security number. It's not required, and we provide some information at the bottom of the document. You can do it with other data. So this would say, don't request a social security number. You can still provide, you can still run credit checks. You can still do background checks if that's your procedure as a landlord. It shouldn't be done in a discriminatory way. In other words, you can't do it just for some people and not for others. But we don't see this as tying the hands of landlords at all. It's just making sure that there's going to be equal access for people to rental housing in the state, regardless of immigration status. And so these two provisions together, adding status as a protected class, and prohibiting the requesting or requirement of a social security number, would really open up the rental market to immigrant families in the state, as well as immigrant families who are arriving into the state,
Right.
And reduce the reliance on employer-provided housing. And the last thing I'll say is that we're talking about this issue in the context of a real priority from the legislature for the construction of new housing, and many of the workers who are coming to Vermont right now to build the housing that the state needs are immigrant workers. And they themselves, while building up the housing stock that we so desperately need as the state, are living in substandard housing
Right.
themselves.
Classic
and are
irony.
being denied
Yes,
access.
absolutely.
So I think
Bookmakers' children.
this is an access issue, it's an equal opportunity issue, and it's a workforce development issue. If we want the state to have the workers that are needed to build the housing that we need to deal with the fact of providing access to housing for those state workers.
We're clear.
Yeah, and I just
We are
wanna,
clean.
it's not only, don't think about all these undocumented immigrants. A lot of people that are doing this have maybe a work visa or are in the process of getting a social security number. They have in the process of getting their work permit. So of course they could get a social security number, but until then, months are gonna pass and they need this support to rent a house. They can pay it, they cannot access it.
So what I'd be looking for from the committee, is clarifying questions quickly, hopefully, and any sense that, someone can't live with continuing this conversation and putting this proposal in the draft bill.
I think this is, I would support this, however, the protected class piece needs to go to judiciary.
We could put it in here and they could get a drive-by, because we
Right.
did that with
Yes.
fair housing
Right, I just give you a
last year.
second.
Yes,
That's a-
yeah, I think there are other things that would involve judiciary in the bill.
But I think,
But yes, they would get their day of review
yeah,
of this as well, because last year we did a lot of, 103 was a lot of fair workplace, fair housing and things.
absolutely. And it's good for us to do the tee-up work, and they then can look at it fairly quickly.
And yeah, we've also spoken with Chairman Rachelson about this.
Well, that's the next step when it gets to the
I'm
house.
sorry,
We have to
you're
get
right,
it
you're right.
here.
We have not yet
What is
spoken
she,
with.
what is she chair?
She's not the chair, she's just on House Judiciary.
Oh, yes,
Apologies,
yes,
yeah,
okay. No, I was like, is there a committee? I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
great for when it gets to the house, but we gotta get it from here first.
Right, right, right.
And the second piece I
Yeah.
want to add is are there any additional barriers the farmers are identifying that would make this housing project work more easily for them? It strikes me as a great deal for the farmers. Is there anything else though that would help them? I mean, or have you addressed all the barriers you see at the moment?
It's not a very rural area, and there is housing around the farm that farm workers can rent, and this helps the farmers take out the hat of being landlords and really just be
Mhm.
employers.
Yeah.
Just a quick, on the housing that's being built,
Mhm.
are there controls on how much the farmer can ask for rent? Or who ends up owning it? Is it the farmer?
Yeah.
The farmer.
It's on the farmer's
So is
land.
there a limit on what they can charge for rent?
Yeah, it comes with it's a deal about work, work for the housing. So
Okay.
it's fine on
It's
the.
part of the contract, right?
contract,
Yeah.
But
But,
a contract that they negotiate with the workers?
With VHCB, I think, and
All right, well,
CHT,
that was my question.
yeah, although it,
Champlain Housing Trust.
right, it
Okay.
depends if the farm is in the Milk with Dignity program or not. Outside the program, there is, and I don't remember the precise language, but there's a sort of covenant that the farm agrees to, that this will be farm worker housing for a certain period of time in order to qualify for state funding. But I don't believe that has any language about rent charging or wage deductions. And that's actually an issue that we've seen, that in the
Well-
construction of this new housing, for example, the Milk with Dignity Standards Council, this private entity created by the farm workers, has really had to step in many instances in order to ensure that the new housing is being provided in a way that's compliant with state law around, for example, the farmer says, okay, you have this new housing, and if I see any damages, I'm gonna be taking that money out of your paycheck, and I'm gonna be doing spot inspections unannounced to make sure that it's in good conditions, and, those are things that are a violation of tenants' rights, but would be happening without the supervision of this sort of external private enforcement.
Okay,
mechanism.
so if there's anything we need to clarify or improve, let us know soon.
That,
Just-
yes,
just-
get back to us, we should talk to the HCP, but yeah, I mean, I agree. If, at some point, it's hard for us to legislate how, like, the details of when you get this money, what happens, and I hear you that even if you do write it down, it needs to be enforced. But we can take more ideas. We just probably, there's nothing we're gonna be able to do right now on this issue without more language. But, so I just wanna make sure this is the time to speak to the fair housing piece and, make sure that you speak now if you don't wanna see it in the next draft of the bill.
No, just a cautionary word.
Yes.
Any chairs. I believe farm worker housing on the farm is exempt from property taxes.
Interesting.
I remember
It's like considered farm
it
property.
is, yeah.
With respect to social security numbers, when farm workers obtain employment, don't they have to produce social security numbers to get it on for the I-9 process?
Yeah, we don't have a particular insight into the ways that employers are doing I-9s or their paperwork.
Well,
But
many of the I-9s are false. Many of the numbers that are produced are false, aren't they?
We don't check on that, we don't look at that, we
You
know
don't
that
know?
when,
The answer?
we don't ask who's documented or undocumented, we don't get into that detail. But what we know is that when people wanna rent outside and they don't have a valid social security number, they are not gonna be.
But what I'm trying to understand is when there's an inability to produce social security numbers in order to do the credit checks that may be required, how does that compare with the ability to produce social security numbers in order to get the job in the first place? How do
This
those
could be
two things
separate.
reconcile?
Yeah, we don't know how other, like, social security numbers are produced, like, that's not something that. I will know.
I think Randy's asking, I mean, to get the job in the first place, they have to show something. Is that what?
But we're talking about a separate
They have to
conversation for
produce a
housing.
social security number, and that's in order to get the job in the first place, and housing comes after the job, not before it. So that's what I'm trying to reconcile, is if they had a social security number to get the job in the first place, why don't they have a social security number in order to get the housing to live in associated with the job?
I don't think they need a social security job for something, number for
On
something.
with the I-9 form,
Mhm.
it's not necessarily the applicant who puts in the social security number. It's supposed to be, but it could be the employer who puts in the social
Where would
security
the, where
number.
would the employer get the social security number?
Wherever you get,
I guess, so we're really behind, so what I'm gonna say is, I
We
don't,
get into that.
that's a question that we can work on answering. I'm not, please correct me now if I'm wrong, I'm not hearing anyone say, I can't live with continuing this conversation and looking at this language as part of the bill. We can get the right
Well,
person to
I would
answer
say
that
that
question.
certainly we can look at this, but I certainly think we need some additional information
Yes,
and
right.
testimony before going
I
further.
think what we're hearing is, that's a totally separate. I want to look at immigration more in this committee as a workforce issue, so I'm happy to have those conversations. I just think, what we're hearing is asking for housing to be separated from employment agreements and people being able to provide other means of proving that they can pay their rent.
Yeah, precisely. And were this bill to be passed, there would still be employer-provided housing in the
Right.
state. That's still going to be part of the model of agriculture in Vermont. But this would increase options for people to look for housing.
I would assume that the employer, the farmer, would be vouching for some of the workers that are coming to work for him or her.
Just as tiny, just when we look at employer supplied housing, we should also just not exclude the housing that like hospitals provide for employees and,
Well, they're
And
just
just-
forced to.
right? So.
But
I
in
mean,
many cases, they are not operating as the landlord. They are.
Right, totally understand. I'm just
But it
saying.
is tied to their employment. in
Yes,
some
yes,
instances.
so
yeah,
let's just not,
fair.
let's
Right.
include that in the conversation.
Right.
Skiers are building housing for.
And they have for years.
And as I think Senator Carson said, they can't help it, really, if we are gonna have a supply chain and a workforce at all, they're being forced into this position, and the more we can do to protect everyone in that situation, the better.
Yes.
And produce housing that's not tied to your foot. Thank you, this has been really helpful. Yes, so I'm gonna say on the record, everyone is open to this discussion, and we are ready to put the fair housing related immigration language into the next draft of the Be Home bill.
And
Well,
we
understand though, and when you say everyone, I'm happy to look at this, but at this stage, I'm not convinced that it's a good idea.
Okay,
And
Okay.
so I may in fact oppose, I want to hear additional
yes,
testimony.
okay, that's fair. Anyone else? It sounds like we have at least a majority who are favorable toward the conversation. One person who just is willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, I'm
I-
really,
yeah,
I'll
okay.
have the discussion, I just need some more details.
Yes, me too. Okay.
And numbers.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
all the-
Yeah, and we'll be happy to come in and discuss more. And really, I think we're melding two conversations that are related,
Right.
but could be happening in parallel tracks. One about farm worker housing in the state, and one about housing access for immigrant families and anti-discrimination provisions.
Yeah, well, thank you for everything you're doing to provide people housing in the state, safe and affordable housing, and bringing this to us. And we will be back in touch and have more time to clarify things in the conversation with others present.
Thank you so much.
And congrats on the first house.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, members.
And the first one's always the hardest.
Yeah.
Richard Ledbeater, we're running a little behind. But you're used to working with legislatures, so you know that.
I am.
Is this better?
I met Richard at the CSG gathering in North Carolina as I was on my way in to do a housing panel discussion, and heard about ESRI's work to inform our GIS and our systems that give us as much accuracy as we can have on mapping out housing and property valuation, et cetera. So Richard mentioned some things in Colorado that I thought were really interesting for us to explore as quickly as we can.
Oh, yes, we talked about this with enthusiasm, I believe, last week.
Yes, and I don't want to misrepresent it, so I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
All right. Can you see my slides?
We can
Not-
see you.
We can see you, and just we need the volume up a tiny bit.
All right.
Now we can see your slide.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm the director for State Government Industry Solutions. The way I explain that to my mother is I'm the chief story collector for all things state government. And part of my hat is to care for the professional associations in DC, CSG, NCSL, governors, even counties and cities as well. So I my job there is to remind practitioners that policy is a geography problem. And go from there. And there we go. Just to ground set, level set, everybody. GIS is more than just that map you get in your committee meetings. That end result from the executive departments on an issue. There's data, there's analysis that happens. There are apps to improve, and then there are maps. And I will say Vermont is one of my poster children of all of the states in the completeness on your data collection, the formality, the curation of the data, the apps that you put out for the individual departments, because your practitioners get into those systems of records, like the assessment data, like the voting registration files, E911, you name it, even the flooding issues that you've had recently. But the insight is the analysis that happens, that getting those data sets together. You know, where are the grants going to? What farms? What county are those farms in? Which legislative districts do those farms fall into? Getting insight through other tertiary relationships. And then there's engagement, getting that out to you, the practitioner who has to create the policy discussion, need the data to back it up, but also the citizens of your state as well. And as I said, it's a policy, it's a geography problem. Everything you do has to do with where, and that's what brought me to this discussion. This is one of my best examples of analysis, of making data actionable. During the times, the troubles, as I'll call them, during COVID, I read about libraries finding people outside of the library using the Wi-Fi because they didn't have it at home. Well, very simply and very quickly, we're able to take a national data set of libraries, compare it to the FCC data, compare it to their rating of and how many people got served. And all of a sudden you can make a map within minutes of where the need was versus where it could be spent. So that's what I'm all about, is getting those discussions out into what's the realm of the possible. What data do you need to make your policy actions a little bit more efficient? So as ground setting, that's why I was speaking at CSG. And one of the case studies was Summit County. Summit County had similar problems to Vermont in that, short-term rentals, whether they're Airbnb or Vrbo or just even renting properties, was a boon economically, but it had its hindrances. Very shortly, they had to get a grasp around this, and the county actually went to the legislature to get changes to the tax rolls on how they could start taxing properties differently to meet this new feature of the housing market, short-term rentals and ADU units. So they had to come to grips with a growth of housing values that doubled in 2 years, from $500,000 to over $1 million for a single unit. This was stressing the economy. It was stressing the residents because the value of their homes, their property taxes were set to skyrocket. They had gone from
Richard,
yep.
While you're on that slide, I'm just going to let you know you have a spelling challenge here on housing. You have a housing average rather than a housing average, just for future slides.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. Not garden hoses, but housing.
I mean, that could be an indicator for if
yes.
there's a house there.
How is Home Depot going? Is it moving? So they had a quick growth. Residents were complaining, but they were supportive because some of them were using this as their retirement as well. So they had to come to some level of equity of this massive growth that their experiences. Your room actually understands this very well. The traffic, the additional noise, the additional garbage, the services that had to happen, and how do you pay for it, and how do you address it? So they went to the state legislature, asked for ability to change their taxation code in that because the assessments were skyrocketing, they wanted to mitigate that for the residents. So they normalized that and gave homestead credits. If you lived in the county, you got a discount on your assessment. If you owned a rental property, it was a discount plus something. If that owned a rental property that you didn't live in. If you were within the state, you had your assessment. If you were outside of the state in the United States, if you were outside of the country in a foreign country, they found a lot of this investment was foreign investment. So they received the normal assessment upgrades. And with that, they were able to increase their revenue based off the growing value of the housing. So it was the reason for this story, it was a unique way to start looking at the data. And that's fundamentally where.
I mean, it's such a important concept, I think, for tourism areas. What I'm sensing is that the county had to really change the way they were collecting information to help you create this data-rich system. Is that right? I mean, they really had to.
Absolutely. But first they had to go to the legislature to get permission. And that was the beginning of the battle. From that, they were able to refocus on the data, and they were collecting this data, but the question is fit for purpose. Was it good to do the analysis that was required? Fundamentally, for the assessment records, they had a very good address on where they mailed the bill to.
Right.
And they did not have a feel for, was that inside the county, inside the state, inside the United States, to a foreign country. That was one of the first and the biggest cleanup that they had to do, is make sure that the property location was also known. And it wasn't just a record of you own these parcels. The description, the text to that bill didn't describe the physical location of where was it which neighborhood in the county was it in. So that was the biggest cleanup, making the data fit for purpose. Once they were able to map that, they were able to see which ones were county residents with investing in retirement. Were they external? And from that, they were able to set and calculate and play with the data that made the most sense. So once they had the data fit for purpose, then they were able to do the analysis that allowed them to scrub along and do the what ifs. How do I take the assessment data without burdening the residents of the county versus putting the extra burden on those externals that were using the county as an investment portfolio? Fundamentally, any questions about that? So basically, once they saw this housing creep, they were able to regulate the percentages. Some neighborhoods in the county had already exceeded 18% of the housing stock. They did not come back and take away that right to a permit, to ask for a permit to do short-term rentals. But they're waiting for attrition to take that number back down. So if you're in one of those neighborhoods, no, you won't be able to apply for that permit to allow you to do short-term rentals on that property. That's the way they're able to mitigate it. Go ahead.
May I just interrupt to ask, so that's how they enforce it, is through permit application?
Correct.
And permitting?
Correct. And that's something the state had to let them do.
How enforced is that? I mean, how many unpermitted STRs are there out there?
At the beginning, there wasn't a permitting system. Everybody just did it willy-nilly, and people were even building housing and starting to rent it before it was even built. Now it's very much a part of the county tax code and planning code. So much like you go to get a permit, it is enforced now, and it's unpermitted rentals are investigated.
Okay, great.
I do think the county.
Just
Yep.
one more question. Who does that investigation?
That's the county planning office, and regs commissioner. So so in hindsight, they are able to look at public records. They are able to go to Vrbo and Airbnb and search their records, scrape their records and say, do we have addresses on Airbnb's website that are in our county that we don't have having permits? And that's one of the ways they regulate and follow through with our short-term renters permitting, have the right permits to do such a thing. So they're able to go out actually to the web to find third-party data and justify some of that. So that's the short story of what it took. It took about a year to get the permission from the state. It took about a year to 18 months to get the data fit for purpose. And of course, all the while doing analysis and playing with the data to say what's the what ifs. How do I not burden the residents while restructuring my my assessments data and the records itself. When it comes to data,
Well, just Senator Harrison was,
Hi, thank you very much. I saw parking versus mass transit as an issue. Can you talk to that a little bit?
sure. Well, they were faced with a number of townhome communities coming in. And in a regular residential situation, you have a family with 1 or 2 cars. You can plan for that. In rental communities, you often have multiple cars. You have people turning over every week. So you have these ebbs and flows, kind of like a Disney World where Friday, Saturday, and Sundays are just crushed with traffic. So they're able to start looking at neighborhoods and gauging that housing stock percentage and saying, well, if I run transit on the popular days, on getting people to the ski resorts and the other resorts in the area, if I can invent mass transit routes and solutions, I don't have to build the parking. I don't have to build the extra lanes on those roads, going from 2 to 4 lanes. Because until they faced that, they were faced with, I think, well over 10% of the roads being widened by 2 lanes. So that was an analysis that they were able to come through with how much your typical renter, how many cars do they have, what kind of parking is needed for rental units versus home units. How they did that, I'm not quite sure. That was their planner.
Okay, thanks.
I want to compliment the state in that you guys have a lot of data fit for purpose for these very things, for just about every policy topic the legislature faces. Vermont is, as I said, one of my poster children, not in the completeness of the data sets. Esri does have a data house. We do collect federal data and state data when appropriate. It's called the Living Atlas. My slides do have these links if you want to investigate this, but this is a portfolio that we've made of every state. So this is ready for your use. You follow this link at the lower right corner and you can get to these maps. Your GIS professionals can get to these maps, augment these maps, add maps as necessary. The Vermont Center of Geographic Information, I have a feeling you know about them, but I'm going to encourage you to go visit them.
We depend on them regularly and
Yes.
Appreciate John's work enormously.
Yes, good.
So-
I often talk to legislature and they don't know that person.
No,
we're using them more and more.
Right.
So I hope what this has accomplished for us is, this is my hope. We need better data if we're going to figure out where we have problems and where we need to implement solutions. And as we talk about a quote unquote rental registry or asking for better information, I hope this is the direction we take. We can talk to Colorado. We can see, if this is something we'd like to ask for statewide, or there are hotspots where we want to permit them to get better information. But I don't think we're ready. I'm going to say this as chair, you could disagree. I don't think we're ready to regulate short-term rentals differently. I think we need to start asking for the information about who owns them, where they are, what the scope of this issue is that we have. And I think they're partners for us in the country. Yes,
May I, thank you, Madam Chair, so much. This is a great presentation. Just, two things. I think when we start talking about short-term rentals, we also need to talk about second home
Mhm.
owners. That needs to be part of it, even if they're not
Yes,
rented.
right.
And then,
Especially if they're not.
yeah, really. Then, there's it's a name that starts with an M. It's like Manacoozy or Mancozy, geographic, display that shows you the height is the value of property per whatever unit you want to use, per foot, per acre. And it shows visually the value of residential property because it's actually more valuable in terms of taxing per unit than commercial, which is often not known. But I would think, Mr. Ledbetter, that you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. Do you
Yes,
know?
I am. And
Mancozy, maybe?
quite a few, I don't know that name in particular, but quite a few cities have taken their assessed value, put it in the Z value, as you said, as they get a little bit more sophisticated, and they're able to see per foot the value of the taxes, whether it's a single acre home or a 3 acre home, and having that value dissipate. As they get a little bit more sophisticated, they're able to take their expenses, road
Yes.
maintenance, water and sewer maintenance, schools, blah,
Yeah.
et cetera, subtract that. And you're able to my own county justified not allowing 3 acre homes anymore because the
Right.
cost of maintenance for the roads, the school system and
Right.
everything, they weren't collecting enough. It was actually in the negative.
Yeah, so
That is key.
so we can find that data. I can find that.
Okay, and we can have
But
a
it's-
testimony
yeah.
on that. Yeah.
Richard, to go back to your last slide, sorry to be the miscorrection here. But John Adams is not a state representative. John is the director of the center.
I'm sorry, that was it was a representative for the NISJIC Professional
Okay, but
Association.
that actually is a title in most states,
Yeah.
state representatives.
Right, I realized what I did when you said that, yes.
Poor man, you're getting,
Sorry.
your grammar lesson from high school.
No, it's not a grammar. It's
His
a,
title's the
that
GIO.
actually has a different value here if
Yes.
you look at data.
Yes.
But thank you, we have these slides and I'm so glad we met and we are a ski state, so is Colorado, we need to learn from each other. And I'm so glad you shared this with us and enlightened us.
This is super helpful, Richard. And does the state have membership in ESRI?
That's what
Yes.
Adam said.
Yes.
So, but we pay as a state. Well, no, the question is who pays so that we
No.
can access it?
So the executive departments all have their own licenses. That's one thing I'd love to have my local rep talk to you about is we do have states that have what we call enterprise licensing. Basically, it's a all-you-can-eat agreement that you're able to get to our software ubiquitously. Many states include the legislative staff in those relationships so that legislative research staff can have access to the data. If you see the link at the bottom of this page, that's a story map by John. But it leads you to the portals where he has the data published, ready to use by external agencies. So you could be using the data, you could be investigating, saying, this kind of data, but it needs to include X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So would love to talk to you further about how the state can advance into that. But yes, we do. Just so know,
Richard,
state of Vermont is user number 293. We are now putting out user numbers in the very high 6 digits. So you guys have been with us a long, long time.
Oh, great.
And it's been around for decades.
Right.
Yeah.
we just don't unlock this tool.
Yeah, it's really good.
So Richard, just to close out, if you could email Scott, our committee assistant, myself.
Not Scott. Magali?
Hmm?
Magali, not
No,
Scott.
I'm sorry, Scott, this person on the
Oh,
screen.
okay.
Scott DeCristofaro, your regional person. I miss Scott, but we love Magali. But if you could email your regional person, Magali, our committee assistant, myself, you know, anyone's included, but we could get a conversation going about what data we're not getting. We have our housing commissioner in the room as well, who I hope wants this data.
Yes.
more
Just, we
Yeah.
should share the Atlas of Disaster with,
Like the
Richard.
climate
He
vulnerability.
Yes,
probably already
yes,
knows
right.
all about it.
I just think it should be part of his portfolio if it's not already.
I'm sure.
So yeah, the federal camera data, their environmental, it's coming out of the current administration. That's Esri's technology, where it has a very good science model behind a lot of the NASA and climate data. So there are lots of things to show you from the federal level that you probably never even considered that are there to use. The data is there. You can download it. The process is there. It's repeatable. And it's up to you to get more intimate data of your state and of your local jurisdictions.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. We will continue to be in touch. I know this is a great tool.
A
All
great
right.
CSG relationship here.
Thank you. Well, anytime. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Ellen, thank you for your patience. We need to go back to go through the language that we have. I have us on page 10 or 11.
Yes, I think we left off on page 10. I don't think I started page 11.
Right.
Great. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, today we are going back to draft 4.1 of what is draft request 24-0067, the Be Home Act.
Bill.
Bill,
Not-
sorry.
I hope it gets signed.
Well, yes, it is currently a bill. So when last we spoke on Friday, I was walking through the Act 250 sections of this bill. And so, yes, on page 10, we had just been talking about,
Page
the-
10,
page
is that where we
10.
should go?
Sure, I mean, just to recap, we had left off talking about you do have to resolve some conflicts in this bill.
Yes.
Because they're layered sort of thing. There are multiple exemptions for housing in this bill that sort of, you should probably pick one.
Right. We have
So
no conflict.
you have options. And
I told
then,
Senator Harrison I wouldn't delete anything until we've gone fully through the bill.
Yes.
So we're just trying to note conflicts.
And I appreciate that, yes. So we have a picture of everything.
Yes.
Yes.
and so on to page 11. So on page 11, still somewhat related to this topic, at the top, this first subdivision starting on line 1 is one of the sunset provisions from last session. And so the language is striking the sunset of July 1, 2026 on the provision that raises or eliminates the cap on the number of priority housing project units. And so again, this is another one of the conflict options because the H9 719 provisions eliminated priority housing projects entirely because there's a broader exemption that would cover them.
Right.
So again, this is an option.
It's like what Randy always says, everything should be a priority housing project. So
Right.
we have the option of just totally broadening it and not requiring
Yes.
this specific exemption.
Except that within priority housing project, it isn't, I mean, in tier 1, presumably, once we do all the mapping and do all the work, a project would get a green light. However, the internal negotiation of what percent of any project that would have to be affordable or would have to be affordable over time, that is an internal negotiate. That is a piece we have to weigh in on, which is so priority housing project still has a value as a green light, but it still has expectations of how much is affordable and not affordable within it.
That is something you.
Am I making any sense?
Yes.
So you green light the project, yeah, but that's just the beginning of it. Then you have to figure out how much is gonna be affordable, how much is gonna be middle income, how much, you're just figuring out stuff.
So that is something that you will have to address
Right.
if it is
Yeah.
a concern to you. It has come up in prior years when
Yeah.
you have discussed the concept of a full exemption. I will say that later in this bill, additional H719 language, well, even what I'm about to talk about does also includes some language around zoning provisions related to affordable housing. So in the broad picture around Act 250 exemptions, the backdrop of that is that there will be municipal regulation of them. And so you may want to consider coming at it from that angle if that's something you're interested in, or as you just said, building in language in the tier 1 aspect, which there currently isn't in this draft.
And as we confer some of these powers to communities, some of them have different policy decisions they want to make around inclusionary zoning, and commercial, mixed commercial. So it is a big policy question if we want to continue to incentivize something separately, or we want to let communities make those decisions more often.
So just on that line, so are you recommending that we don't have a base definition for priority housing, or I shouldn't say recommending, but is our decision here whether or not to have a base set of qualifications for priority housing projects or affordable housing, like how that's defined?
So the existing statutory scheme has defined that priority housing project has always been a specific Act 250 concept, and it has a very specific definition. And it is a part of that is affordable housing.
Right.
Title 24 with the zoning provisions has a slightly different but related definition for affordable housing. And so you have options. Depending on your choice on the prior page with if you want to do a blanket exemption, the concept of priority housing project isn't necessary because everything is exempt, or all housing is exempt. However,
I mentioned you, Senator Brock, all housing is a priority housing project at that point, which is what he wants.
That's what I want.
but
It'd be a very short bill too.
yes, right. So very simple to draft. So, but if you'd like to maintain some kind of incentive system for affordable housing project, you may want to consider if you want to do that in Act 250 or in zoning, or if you're looking for a pure incentive,
Or maybe in the
monetary
designation
incentive.
program.
So, but
Yeah,
if
right.
you choose a blanket exemption, there isn't necessarily a role for priority housing projects.
Senator.
Can I just so I understand? So to me, it's important to have a definition of affordable housing at least.
Yes. That wouldn't go away.
Yes, so there is already, this concept of priority housing project is existing,
Right.
and there is a definition of affordable housing. But if you don't have a concept, you don't need a definition.
Right.
Unless you decide to introduce a priority housing, priority housing project has multiple elements.
Right.
Not only including the affordable aspect, but also its physical location.
Yeah.
And so if you go with a blanket exemption, you could choose to maybe then shift and say, okay, well, if it's
In a designated area.
if you're giving them a blanket exemption, you may want to consider not in a designated area.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because of,
Just back up so I get my head around this. When we use affordable, and we're building affordable housing, that generally means perpetually subsidized because the people that are in it can't afford the rent that it would take to pay the cost of the building. We build buildings, and if you had to put them at market value where the developer had to cover his costs plus a little profit, the tenants that we were trying to bring in there couldn't afford the rent. And so in some ways that rent is perpetually subsidized.
for X number of years.
Well, that's the other question. Are these perpetually affordable?
No,
Okay, so I can get it and after 10 years,
it's 30 years.
30
Yeah.
years, all right, that's better.
The priority is 30 years.
Yes.
Yeah,
Let me check, I think it's 30, but.
It may be just 20, but it's for quite a
okay,
number
it's
of
longer
years.
than 10, but,
It's longer than 10, yes.
yeah, okay. So it's not, it can go in the market and be, full market in 2 years. there is a limit or a formula that municipalities are allowed to use. They cannot do affordable housing at full market value. And I've asked the tax commissioner, and I haven't got an answer as to what that formula is, but it's not full market value, which is a disincentive to towns to perhaps want to produce that kind of property. If you've got limited space and you're not going to get your market. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how all these things interact when you've got a local community making a decision about where and what kind of housing they're going to put in. And I just saw this, that construction priority housing in a municipality with a population of 10,000.
Yeah.
That leaves out Montpelier and I
We have
believe
this Middlebury
Valley,
issue.
and there's some of the larger communities, cities in this state
Right.
Well,
that
we need priority.
we
Yeah.
do. So that's what I'm wondering,
I
We
why
can
that
change
number
that.
is there.
Well, we, in conversation with Natural Resources, I remember this being a point of confusion last year as well. It's one of the only areas where we regulate based on the population of the community. And I think it adds a layer of confusion that's unnecessary. So it still exists in here, as Senator Cummings is pointing out. It's language that's not struck. Would it disappear if we repealed priority housing project? I think a suggestion's on the table to take out the population thresholds because Middlebury's just under it. It's just a very arbitrary thing.
I mean, the whole Putney issue is a priority housing project and it doesn't have 10,000 people.
Right.
So there's, but
Yeah,
It
25.
would be good to know if it worked. I mean, this was put in for a purpose. It'd be good to know if
It
it
has
worked.
worked. It's been incredibly
Well,
successful.
the 10,000,
Oh, I see what you mean.
I mean, just before we throw it out.
No, I think a suggestion is there to look at.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
the one area, to my knowledge, where we use the population of a community to regulate how many units before they're kicked into Act 250. And most of our communities have said, okay, but we're at 9,000 something. I don't, why are we doing this? Because we want to be treated as a.
Sure, and so maybe it should be a different number, or maybe not have a number at all.
Right.
I
I'm just
would just
opening
like
it
to know
up.
more
Yeah.
about.
And I'm just
If it
curious if it will still exist, even if we pass the other language, this threshold, because it's still there on page 10.
the language on page 10, the specific lead-in language is that development does not include priority housing projects at all in a municipality with 10,000 or more. And so that functions as the cap. So your sunset language that I just referenced, currently until 2026, also removes the cap.
Right.
And then 2 years ago, you also removed the smallest cap and bumped it up to the next biggest. So this is a complicated issue with multiple elements
Right.
on priority housing projects. If you'd like to talk about that, we
Yeah.
should probably discuss all of the elements.
Yes.
It is 15
They're like-
years, it's not
Right.
30 years.
Yes.
But I was thinking about it's 30%, but it's also, it's 20% of the units have to be affordable,
Right.
but affordable is
80%
30%
are
of their
I'm
market.
income.
a visual
So-
learner.
Yeah.
And
If you want to do this though, it is a whole conversation that I would need to sort of.
Yes,
prep you on.
we
So-
would need to revisit this whole.
yeah, because I'm newer to this committee and I know with their whole year. And I keep hearing numbers and priorities, and I'm a visual learner. I like bullets. And this does, I don't need paragraphs, but
A spreadsheet kind
a
of.
spreadsheet kind of thing.
There's
would
a
be helpful.
wonderful flow chart from the Natural Resources Board on defining
Yay.
what a priority housing project
I
is.
just emailed it to Magali.
Okay.
Great.
Good.
Where, should we put it up? Is that,
I mean, if you want to spend
Is
time on this topic.
do we want to spend time on it?
I don't know, I mean, today.
Or do
we're
you wanna
full,
wait?
but-
I think we should try and move through this and then
Yeah.
decide what we're gonna do deep dives into.
Yes, because it really is a secondary topic to your bigger decision on what kind of exemption are you actually gonna go with.
Right.
Okay.
This is an exemption from Act 250.
Yes.
I just want to bookmark mentally for me, some definition here of what we do outside of designated areas.
Yes.
It helps us say, okay, if we're doing 30 by 2, are we doing it for senior housing, mixed, you know, are we making sure it has affordable housing in it? It's not and this is what I wanted to bring to BNRC. They're worried about McMansions carved into the side of a hill, but every community besides our designated area still needs a new senior housing project, a new affordable housing
Affordable senior
project.
housing would be
Yeah.
really
If
good.
we
Yeah.
adopt our tiers
Mhm.
and accept it as we're seriously considering it,
Yeah,
incorporating the record, everything will be a designated area. Everything will have some form of designation. So.
it would leave out places that don't have
Yes.
sophisticated zoning.
Right, so there needs to be thoughtful planning, which they
Right.
call for in less developed,
That's I'm just,
more rural.
so right, we don't have to have the discussion, but I'm flagging that we need a definition of some desirable affordable housing project outside of designated areas.
And we're gonna need to use language that anticipates the designated areas changing.
I need to get, when I hear affordable, it's perpetually subsidized.
Mm.
It's.
Sadly, it's
Well,
This is
some,
the
but
15
some
years.
is,
Oh, yes,
yeah.
but
Some is, some isn't.
we also need to provide for the missing middle, but the things your workers can afford.
Mhm.
And I don't want to see us pushing so hard on one side that we miss
Right.
the people on the other.
These-
The people that are gonna work in this affordable housing.
To some extent, this is somewhere in between those, because it's not perpetual into oblivion, affordable. We're setting this so that the project starts out for working class folks and
Okay,
rent
working-
increases can't happen
I mean,
quickly.
working class folks, to me, are not necessarily people that need subsidized housing. They just need fairly priced housing.
Mhm.
These are people with decently paying jobs. They're union workers, which we don't have much of. But I think we mix up the terms and we need a balance.
Mhm. I agree.
Yeah, and when you talk about, when you go back to the priority housing project discussion, only 20% of the units need to be at what is defined as affordable. The rest of the units can be market rate or however the developer chooses to structure it. So there are a lot of different levers in that conversation that you can pull on. But that is an interesting transition to the next section.
Can I add context? I'm so sorry.
Commissioner, yeah.
For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner Housing. And just to reiterate something that's important, just because I know we're talking visual here, priority housing projects are only in play in designated areas right now. That's why she's saying it's a moot point if there's a full exemption to designated areas. So then you could, if you were to exempt designated areas, you could then talk about moving PHPs outside
Right.
of those areas.
Where do we still need them?
And where would they be appropriate?
And would they still be desirable to build?
Besides,
Well, so the point of building a priority housing project versus just 100% market rate is to achieve the Act 250 exemption.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't need the exemption, you may still need to build to those specifications based on inclusionary zoning at your municipality.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not gonna be, you're not gonna be using it in order to get the Act 250 exemption.
Right.
Now, under the current tiered structure that's proposed here, where it be increase, exemption in the center, outside of that center where there's water and sewer, it's a 30 unit threshold. PHPs could actually still play a role because now you could go over that 30 units without triggering Act 250 if it's a priority housing project. So that's where it could still come in.
Right. I just think it's important to keep the incentive if the incentive has worked. Not necessarily use Act 250 as an incentive, but some other incentive.
Yeah, I think this is all really useful, because I don't think we're getting rid of PHP as a incentive
As a
concept
concept.
for getting past Act 250 when it's the type of housing we know we need
Right.
to meet workforce.
And it would be good to know how much there has been. And if I can just put in a plug for the concept, I think it's really good to have a development with some perpetually affordable or 15 years or 30 years, whatever, and market rate together, because I think it's easier to finance, but it's also better to live in.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Ellen.
Yes, so if you want to talk more about that, I do think the NRB has data also.
Right.
Just mine,
Yes,
Yes,
just mine.
yeah.
we do, and it will be ready sometime this week. She said with her fingers crossed.
Yes, I'm not saying they have time for it anytime soon, but they want to go back to it.
Did we get past line 5 on page 11?
No,
Okay.
we are on line 5. So another new concept in here that came, so
Only
now,
70 more pages. 75 more pages.
line 5, so we are in the part of Act 250, so these are an exemption. So development does not include hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing developments as defined in 24 VSA 43032. And so just to flag, this is a provision that is in H719.
So these would exempt these,
Yes, so under
no
that,
matter where they were.
yes, so exempting hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing. Affordable housing here meaning housing with at least 20% of the units or a minimum of 5 units are affordable, subject to the 15-year or longer covenant. But that says permanent, so I'm gonna say that's longer than
Then
15
I
years.
agree with that. Be bold.
So, having just discussed transportation, there is a different expectation of transportation and ability to transport oneself, depending on where these hotels and motels are. So, hotels and motels are designed so that with the expectation that whoever arrives is able to transport themselves. However, affordable housing, there's a slightly different expectation, and not everybody may have transportation available to them. And that is the only concern I have here with a blanket exemption, is that the exemption, I think, needs to be by, so that people without cars, because some of the people in these affordable housing units will not have cars, or will have bicycles, or will have something else. It's a different clientele and therefore a different transportation expectation. So we may want to build into this near a major transit hub, or some
Okay. I think everybody's
transportation issue.
hearing what you're saying. Yeah.
In these affordable housing units, we are now talking about people who have been homeless and are now being put in with people who have not been homeless, who are probably middle class, lower middle class maybe. Most middle class is lower right now. There's going to be some cultural disputes going on. Are these units all owned by a place like Down Street? Who's going to manage these tenant interactions? Because if we don't, then we might find we have a more difficult job selling or renting the upper value sections.
So I will just point out, these are not specific to homeless populations or
Okay.
this is about conversion to affordable housing, which again only requires 20% of the units to be affordable. So it is mixed.
Right, but what I'm wondering is,
I
a
just wanna make
landlord
sure.
can just evict you if you're
Yeah.
causing problems with the neighbors. We have a specific purpose in doing this mixed unit thing, because we know if you put all 4 people in a tower,
Right.
you have problems.
Somehow I didn't think these were mixed unit. I
They
thought it was a full, perpetually affordable
They don't have to
housing
be.
project.
They don't have to be.
Okay.
So I just read you the definition, and they could be, but it says a housing development with at least 20% or a minimum of 5 units, which are defined as affordable.
Perpetually.
Yes.
It says permanently affordable.
Perpetually means 15 years or longer.
No, that
No,
is
permanent,
correct.
that's permanent.
Priority housing.
Permanently
The
permanent.
modifier is in here, not in the
Not in the
statute.
Right, the
Yeah.
statute refers to
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
15 years.
Yeah.
That's right. So the modifier being permanently just in this.
Just a suggestion, like when it's something like this, that isn't a lot of words, that it'd be helpful to have that, to have the 20% or minimum 5 units instead of the as defined in 24 VSA. Just so we're clear about what we mean.
What we're doing.
I think that's our job to be up to date with as the
I
definition.
think,
Well-
yeah, that's why she's reading it.
Because,
No.
because quite honestly, it would make the bill awfully long if we did
No,
all the
it's,
definitions.
the words
everywhere.
are actually, I'm not saying everywhere. Well, we can talk about it later.
We
Yeah.
can talk about it later.
But we're learning how, the definitions, and we should have a cheat sheet with all the definitions for us.
So, yeah, have a
A cheat sheet.
cheat sheet for everyone who's gonna be looking at this, but whatever.
That's,
Yeah, I mean, that, if you're reading the bill, it is harder for a layperson who doesn't have LexisNexis to go back and find out what that citation
Right.
is.
but
And
as
then
we
when you
tell it to our
read the
colleagues, that's our job.
citation based on what's in the statute, you come, as I just did quickly, to 15 years, and that's not what it meant because it's got a modifier.
Right.
So it makes it even more confusing.
Right, so with,
Whereas if it said so in the statute, what you mean, wouldn't that be clear?
Yes, but legally,
Yeah, exactly. This is
The
illegal.
law.
when a court interprets a document, if you use a defined term differently than the way it's been defined, it then becomes an ambiguous term.
Mhm.
Because the question is raised whether or not you mean the defined term, at which point you open up an avenue to sue. So we can talk about statutory interpretation, I think, at length if you'd like to.
Yeah.
But as long as this is language that was taken from another bill that I actually did not draft myself.
Right.
And so if you'd like to just tell
Yeah.
me what you'd like to say, we can do that. as
Right,
you
I think
request.
we need to know what we are trying to say here, because my assumption was that the hotel motel conversion would make 100% of the units permanently affordable. That was my assumption, because we need those units right now
People who are
for
living
our
in-
VHCB and our housing trust, and the funding we provide is for perpetually affordable housing.
so maybe
Commissioner, is there a different
so-
understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this sets a minimum standard, but, you know, and defining it as affordable housing as sort of, you know, so meeting the statutory definition of that as sort of a minimum standard,
Yeah,
but not requiring. So the parties that would be wanting to, that would benefit from this would be a CHT, a
Right.
VHCB, and so it's likely that they would far exceed the minimum, you know, statutory minimum.
I guess I thought the reason for this definition was because we're gonna be putting money into hotel motel conversions. And I would like that money to go to 100% perpetually affordable housing
Yeah.
for the hotels and motels.
I think there are a couple different avenues to get at that. It can be either on the funding side, where that funding needs to be for,
Yeah,
you know, fully, or, you know, I'd maybe even look to Ellen. There is probably a way to go beyond, you know, maybe the definition of affordable housing isn't what is one.
right, yeah. Cause I can see for, you know, PHPs or somewhere in the what's important to us, we want a percentage to be permanently affordable, but if we're using this definition elsewhere, I just wanna make sure that we're talking about funding perpetually affordable housing developments out of motels and hotels.
I think it is important to distinguish between the Act 250 or whatever kind of land
Yeah.
planning and the
Yeah.
subsidy
Right, so
by the
this is an
state.
an exemption for.
For
yeah.
anyone, private person, public
Right,
person,
right, right.
anyone can
Yeah.
do this. So, which is another reason I'd like
That's
to.
fair.
So
Yeah,
maybe not use the word, whichever word we wouldn't use to make it confusing, just say exactly what we want in terms of units and percentages and time.
I'm not confused by this. This is very straightforward. To me, this tells us that anywhere that there is a conversion of a hotel or motel, it would be exempted and okay. And we could further define it that it would need to be 100% affordable. But, you know, we just have to keep in mind, this could be on Route 5 in the middle of absolutely nowhere. with people, it needs to be affordable
Yeah.
because people exiting homelessness are gonna be stuck in the middle of nowhere with no transportation. So I think we need to be thoughtful about that, but to me, this is very clear. This is enabling some of the development that you're
Yeah.
concerned about in rural
Okay.
and semi-developed
Well, it
areas.
may be entirely clear to you, it is not entirely clear to me
And
at all.
I've jumped ahead, and I don't have to do this, but I've jumped ahead to page 23 because I wanted to see if these were gonna be congruent for other group homes. I think that may be, I don't know what the bottom of page 22 is getting at about privately
Yeah.
held institutions that serve a public function. But we see hotels and motels again, but it doesn't have the qualifier about 24 VSA.
Okay,
And I
so
don't know why.
that's why I think this is really walking through this for the first time, and I think we really should get through it and then come back for further discussion
Okay.
and pick
Yes.
what we
Yeah,
want
I have
for
a-
deeper
I
discussion.
leave a question mark here.
I have a big question mark there.
Because
and
it's
your
11:30
transportation
and we're
question.
still on page
Right.
11.
But I guess the only thing that I want to, the reason I was comparing those two is because I'm interested in Act 250 exemptions for
Right.
group homes or youth facility, for the questions that we've been circling around with, at-risk youth.
Right.
What do you call this? Like juvenile detention facility?
Oh, the crisis?
So you are talking about group home. Okay, I was like, that is a very specific other topic that is not necessarily, I don't know, we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
Any,
You are talking about group
obviously
homes.
don't
but any
represent
kind of
you
group
there.
home, it could be for
Yes,
disabled or
yeah.
mental health or
Yes.
substance
Substance.
abuse.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. I am interested, I don't know if I'm interested in it here, but I'm
Well,
interested.
let's
So
Yeah.
you're right that those two do go together. I think the reason it doesn't cite 24 VSA is because this is in 24 VSA, so.
Got it.
So,
Okay,
We're already-
that's helpful.
yeah,
This is already operating in
Okay.
24 VSA, the whole section 21.
Okay,
and then the properties you're talking about, Madam Chair, I think the bottom of page 22 is more what that language change is trying to get at.
okay, so we're not trying to exempt group homes from Act 250.
I don't think there's any provision like that specifically, except for the broadest exemption in general.
Which is housing in designated areas.
Well, it's anything, there are
Yeah.
anything in designated areas that is exempt in part of this, so, but nothing on specifically group homes.
So later on, our intent has been to exempt them from municipal regulation,
It's not a full exemption, but it's
It's
a limited exemption,
the limited exemption.
like you did for homeless shelters last year.
Right.
It needs to be limited for.
Delinquent teenagers are very difficult.
Well, difficult, but now they're in jail right now,
Yes.
so
But-
that's a
but
problem.
And the court has
obviously
already
don't
ruled
represent
on
the
it.
town of
Okay,
Newbury.
so I'm sorry, I opened the can
They
of
are not all
worms.
in
Yeah,
jail.
I just wanted to make sure that
They can't be.
this was not the area, I do want to make sure this comes up later for youth facilities. I'm satisfied.
In designated areas? I think you get a lot of pushback.
So on page
think we're
11,
That's okay. I
It's
think
another big discussion.
we're gonna move to section 9. Section 9 is adding a new provision. A district commission may issue a permit contingent upon an applicant receiving permits from the Agency of Natural Resources or other state agency. I think you will need to take testimony on this. This also comes from H 719. I don't think this provision is necessary.
Is this the concurrent permitting?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, so the question is this necessary, this section?
but interesting, as Ellen's heard me say, I have heard this from engineers and other people involved in the process, that different district commissions are telling them, we don't even want to look at this until you do this. And that's hard for them to hear because it's such a long process and they'd like to be starting it. But we are inviting several district commission chairs in.
Sending you a
Yeah,
note on
yeah.
that right now.
I just saw that come in the email, thank you.
More work.
No, to identify.
And so
You
on,
mean, excuse me for interrupting, Sabina Haskell, Chairman, you do mean commissioners, not district coordinators? There's-
No, the chair of the district
That's what I
commission.
thought.
Which one would you see? We'd like some recommendations on ones.
Do you
To
think
speak.
it's helpful to have a commissioner and a coordinator?
We can talk about that, but the
Okay.
email that came in said commissioners, but.
That's what we
have
intended,
chairs.
but maybe
Okay.
we want the professional staff.
Thank you.
So we know what this achieves, and you don't think it's necessary, but
Got
it might be that we make explicit something that we think should be happening anyway.
Right, and it's a may, that's, they don't have to. Are we not
That's true.
talking about the repeals or?
I didn't get there yet.
Okay,
We haven't
good,
gotten
good.
to section 10.
10, it's
I know, I
after
saw
9.
you moving,
So
but,
not
okay.
Well, I
necessarily.
like to know what's coming up
Okay.
next. Senator Cummings, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. So section 10 is a set of repeals that relates to things we have already discussed. It is repealing priority housing project sections in multiple areas. Including the sunset provisions from last year's bill. Because this comes out of H 719, where your committee request was to get rid of the sunset itself, whereas the request for H 719 was to have a broad exemption.
Right.
So that is, again, another area you need to shore up.
Mm-hmm.
So on page 12, section 11 is establishing a process for delegation of review authority to municipalities, also called Act 250 municipal delegation. So this is also from H 719. It was drafted before the municipal delegation report came out, so it is not reflective of their report and is a pretty just broad section.
So perhaps we may not need this. I mean, we may not need this now that that work has been done and the delegate and the report is in. And if it's too broad, we probably don't want it.
I don't really know what you're saying, except to say that this is the only part of this bill specific to municipal delegation. It is a choice that you have. There is a bill in the House that more closely resembles what the municipal delegation report recommends.
Exactly.
However,
We may wanna look at that.
You should have a broader conversation about that in general. So I'll read through this language quickly. So notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter to the contrary, the Natural Resources Board shall establish a process by which a municipality is delegated authority to review development and subdivisions in lieu of the process established under the rest of this chapter, so the Act 250 permitting process. In any municipality that has been delegated authority under this section, any development or subdivision shall be exempt from needing a permit or permit amendment from the district commission. Delegation of review authority under this section shall require a municipality to have adopted high-quality zoning bylaws that are functionally equivalent to the criteria established in Act 250. The board shall review a municipality's bylaws for conformance with the standard and any other requirements it establishes. On or before July 1, 2025, the Natural Resources Board, in consultation with the Regional Planning Commission and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, shall issue guidelines establishing the requirements for municipalities seeking delegation under this section. So this is very broad language.
And there's better language now in a House bill that we might look at. So I would suggest we do that.
So we're just flagging this as,
Yes.
it's,
Might need to be
needs
replaced.
work, it needs work. Yeah.
And it is a fundamentally different process to me than the tier 1, tier 2.
Yes.
But it's something that some folks might prefer to the tier 1 or tier 2. And this would be for the entire town,
So
right?
this actually does not specify. So I will just say, this is why Senator Clarkson, I'm being a little evasive to your question,
Yeah.
but in other times when the tiers have been discussed, if you have tier 1,
And
you
one
may
thing-
not need
Right,
municipal delegation.
exactly. So if we adopt the recommendations of the NRB, we will not need this section. That's what I was trying to say.
That's
It's like,
not what I
why-
heard you say, but okay.
I was trying to say that we may not need this
Sure.
section
Oh,
if
okay.
we,
Depends on the choices you make. yes.
exactly,
Yes,
depending on our
sorry.
choices, we may
Yeah.
not need this
I
section.
understand.
I'd say maybe I'd caveat that by saying.
Commissioner.
Thank you, sorry, Alex Farrell, Commissioner Housing. I caveat that by saying, municipal delegation could actually be the full boundaries of the municipality, whereas a tier 1 is a boundary within the municipality.
True, but tier 2 and tier 3 would take care of the other parts of the town.
But this would mean that they would be moot because there wouldn't be jurisdiction, because the municipality would have wall-to-wall jurisdiction.
So I think we need to hear from someone who wants this, because I've heard a lot of communities with the functionally equivalent piece, that's a bit scary. You know, they are not years of bureaucracy and expertise sort of combined. So I'm putting it out there that I know that this study was hard work, you know, but I don't know anybody who's advocating for this path in lieu of other opportunities and paths for exemption.
Madam Chair, because the delegation essentially gives the Act 250 rules to a municipality, the Act 250 rules are still in effect in the municipality. So this is kind of an in-between measure in terms of protection to the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So
I just don't know
I
who
would
wants
just,
it.
well, people who are in the legislature who might think that the tiers are too generous.
But I guess what
So-
I'm saying is their community still has to
Yeah.
take this delegation on board,
Right.
which is.
They have to do the
a
mapping,
huge
they have to
lift.
do all this work.
No,
They have to make the
So
decision.
I'm at
No,
least
I
gonna ask
understand.
VLCT
Oh, yeah.
if they
Oh,
know
definitely.
anybody who feels they could do this.
No.
Because if they don't, I don't want people to think this option is available and ask their municipality to do something that we've heard municipalities cannot achieve.
Exactly. I would suggest you talk to the city of Winooski, that we have them on the list. Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want to email Magali and
Yeah.
Elaine.
Yeah, at one point they
Yeah.
were interested in this,
Right,
but it's certainly gonna be easier for them if the tier 1, tier 2
exactly.
will be easier.
Yeah.
That's why I don't,
But this would provide more protection for folks who think that the tier 1, 2, and 3 might be giving away too much protection. This would be for legislators a better
Okay.
option. So I think we
They
should
can
just-
advocate for it
Yeah.
then, but
Yeah,
you can invite a legislator in, but they're not
no,
ultimately
no.
the ones who would be delegated
Yeah.
this authority.
right.
So I get that people like worked hard on this and think it has
Oh, sure.
merit, but we need to hear, the responsible thing to do would not be to create a totally alternative path to
exactly.
confuse people. Like I'm not
We
gonna do
can't
that
do
in a bill unless the community says, I'd rather do that.
All right,
And I want this instead
I
of,
see what you're saying.
because we'd have to create a whole nother set of tools
Right,
that's a lot of work, that's a lot of money.
and it would be,
So
yes.
someone has to really fight for this one.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
Thank you.
telling the
No,
world,
that's
fight
helpful.
for it or
That-
not.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's a big question mark by this section. Let's move to section 12.
And in case anyone is curious, it's H768 in the House.
Okay.
The delegation.
Yes, you get the bill, the more detailed delegation bill.
Can you remind us who introduced that?
Representative Stebbins.
Okay, so it wasn't the chair. Okay, great. Yeah.
So on page 13, section 12, we're still on Act 250 as a concept, but this is a different part of Act 250. This is mitigation of primary agricultural soils. So on page 14, the language that's being added is for an alternative or community wastewater system that will serve within a designated area, no mitigation shall be required. So this is mitigation of primary agricultural soils. It's a subject we haven't talked about much recently. Under Act 250, if your development or subdivision is going to destroy primary agricultural soils, you need to mitigate that, either by conserving primary agricultural soils on your property or paying a fee to conserve them elsewhere. This would be lowering the mitigation fee for alternative or community wastewater systems located within a designated area. So again,
But it's
depending on
also saying no mitigation, not just for fee.
oh, no mitigation. Oh, sorry. Yes, no mitigation will be required. Sorry, I have done multiple.
That's okay.
Probably bills on this.
I believe you.
We've lowered it. But again, if you exempt all of the designated areas.
Mm-hmm.
They would not need
Okay.
primary agricultural soil mitigation because that is an Act 250 concept.
Okay.
Don't need if we do NRB.
I wonder if there's a good clarification that, right now, the full exemption of designated centers that's in here, I think specifies for housing, residential development, correct? Not a full Act 250 exemption.
Off the top of my head,
Right.
I think it's on page.
Because the tiers deals with other development, but
well,
this
yes.
just is housing.
Right, so yes, so there are multiple. There are multiple provisions exempting housing, and then there are the tiers that do exempt everything. So depending on what path you choose, I'm just flagging again, this is
Yes.
another designated area flag.
You were a saint, Ellen. This is a fun to keep track of. Nobody
Yes,
criticizing. But otherwise, the ratio is 1-to-1 everywhere.
no, it's actually not, so in a designated area,
Yeah.
so this is a much longer conversation, but
Sure.
basically, it is typically between 2-to-1 and
Yeah.
3-to-1, unless they fall into one of the carve-outs, that is 1-to-1.
Okay. I think I helped create some of those carve outs and I like it all to be 1-to-1.
This is a bigger conversation.
That's the very short
Right.
version.
Right.
And there's a formula in the statute based on the location and type of the soil and the type of the project.
Right. So I'll just say I'm not opposed to outside work from our work in here that looks at the 1-to-1 versus 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 and maybe it's standardized. So,
And maybe it's taken care of if we adopt the recommendations, the NRB recommendations.
It depends.
Okay, it's a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, section 13.
Yeah, so section. Haha, yes, this is before I renumbered everything, right? Oh, no. All right, no, section 13.
It's the recording, duration, and revocation of permits.
Yes, and so this is not in H719.
okay.
This is a request from the chair. So you asked about last year's language for conversion of commercial properties.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I will read through this with you, but I'm not entirely sure if I have captured your intent, and so we can review it. So again, Act 250, permit revocation. So on application signed by each permittee, the district commission may release land subject to a permit under this chapter from the obligations of that permit and the obligations to obtain amendments to the permit and from jurisdiction under this chapter on finding that the use of the land as of the date of application was for a commercial purpose and the use of the land as of the date of application is for housing and would not require a permit or permit amendment, but for the fact that the land is already subject to a permit under this chapter.
So what I don't remember doing last year, I could be wrong, is saying the district commission may or may not do this. It was for less than 25 units of housing, you do not need to amend your Act 250 permit and go through the process if you're transitioning commercial up to 25 units of housing.
So last year I brought you, I think actually like 3 or 4 different ways to accomplish your goal.
Yeah.
And so this is a slightly complicated but comprehensive way.
Yes. Can we say shall?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I think
We generally start with may when
Right.
there's a list of qualifications that need to be met, but
yeah.
it can be shall, and I'll just have to make sure,
On line
line
5.
5.
just to make sure the rest of it lines up. But this is a very specific process that is different than a straight exemption.
Right.
This is to get rid of the Act 250 permit from the property entirely if they're moving from commercial to housing.
Residential.
Right.
So there could be simpler ways to do this
Yeah.
if you were just looking for exempting them from needing a permit
Mhm.
amendment, but this is sort of the more comprehensive way,
Yeah.
because then they won't have a permit
It's
obligation.
not hanging
at
over
all.
their heads
Yeah.
still.
But-
Okay.
Would some of this depend on where the commercial property was?
It could, but I guess what we're saying is it's already being used for like, it's a philosophical conversation we had last year. It's
Right,
already
no,
being used, it's developed, it's a parking lot, it's, all kinds of things that probably aren't gonna see more use from housing. Not necessarily more traffic or more wastewater. So why would we make them
Right.
go through a bunch of things to create housing?
right, exactly.
Yeah,
I stayed in a hotel that was a commercial space and was converted in the last 4 years
Where was that?
in New York.
Oh, New York, yeah, New Orleans.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very
I
interesting.
don't think
It's-
they converted it into.
How they made it work, because it's a challenge with some commercial properties.
Sabina, you look like you wanted to.
I'm just,
Okay.
I'm just listening right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm thinking of things.
She's
Yeah,
actively listening.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
interesting idea and mechanism, and it might, and I totally agree with the purpose. I just think we might wanna think about, like, if they're gonna put 2 units of housing on a 20-acre site, that's not right. We might wanna just look at some minimums or percentages or,
Yep.
And
Just-
where they are.
just some details, but I think the concept is pretty interesting.
I was,
So, and because I will say briefly, currently under Act 250 jurisdiction is perpetual. So once you have a permit issued, there is currently no way to get it off of the property.
Right, I think that's why last year we went with you don't need an amendment. But it might, I see what you're saying. Is it more beneficial to just get your Act 250 permit off, but maybe sometimes we want an amendment or I don't know. Sabina, go ahead.
thank you. I was just gonna say, if, we don't have crystal balls and maybe 30 years from now, it goes back to a commercial development.
Right.
And you might want to have that original commercial on there and maybe not need an amendment for the in-between housing conversion.
Right.
I'm just.
Yeah.
It's of value to the owner possibly in the future.
So to keep the Act 250 permit, but
In abeyance?
be flexible underneath it.
But maybe not require a material change amendment because
Right.
you're converting it to housing. But that's something for you all
This could be an area where we do the self-certification or something. We just, I don't know, like,
Or a minor amendment maybe, or something that's at a much lower level.
what if we
The
said
last
it's
thing you wanna
permitted?
do is require somebody to go through the entire Act 250 process that they've gone through to do something that doesn't substantially change.
Impacts the land.
Yeah. We heard the other day that converting commercial stories to housing is very expensive. Converting a factory is gonna be
Right.
very expensive, so I don't think,
Unless they do an SRO or
yeah,
some other configuration.
but,
Could be like we heard with the farmer for housing where there is communal.
yeah, you could do that.
space.
But you might also get some fairly high-end apartments, which are also nice to have.
Yeah.
Yep,
If only people on state subsidy live in our downtowns, it's not gonna support our downtown businesses. So you need to get mixed use there. But you've got one factory that wasn't using a lot of water. You put in 15 units with showers and saunas and whatever, you may well use more
But
water.
I think it's likely they would have been permitted for substantial use.
maybe not. I think that's
That's a
good point.
wastewater permit, though, isn't it? Like, that's not a land use issue. I think that's what.
No, it would be,
We
no,
made
it
Act
would
250
be whether or
like
not the
everything.
municipality is permitted
Right,
to take that much water out of Berlin Pond.
but they have to get other permits for that have nothing to do with the land use.
Right.
That's a wastewater issue.
Yeah, we should make sure that's the case, yes.
I don't know what happens with change of use on
Yeah.
water permits. I don't.
Right.
Yeah,
In my
there's a
experience,
permit
you
for it.
have to get a separate wastewater permit. You have to
Right.
say like, yeah,
If you're gonna use more,
right,
if you're gonna use less, you
yeah.
don't,
exactly,
or if the type changes.
right. But that's irregardless of Act 250. It could be the smallest project and you have to say, this was a dentist's office, and now it's.
You've gotta have yeah, you've gotta have a municipal hookup.
Right. And right now you have to do it at the municipal and the state level if you also have a municipal wastewater.
We should do
permit.
away with that.
That's in the bill. Let's keep going.
That is
I've
in here
tried
if it
for
ever
30
can
years
get
to
to it.
get rid of that.
We will.
Former mayor of Rutland, who went to be chair of natural resources, tried to get.
Well,
rid of
it's
that.
complicated. We'll get to it, right?
So the rest of that page is the details of how that would play out. I don't know if you want me to read through it.
No, I think we can all absorb this and keep noodling this section.
So on page 16, section 14, so this is another new concept, new language, brand new. No permit or permit amendment is required for a development or subdivision located within a transportation corridor.
Was this my placeholder?
Yes.
Okay, it's very inelegant right now on my account. This is my placeholder for
This is KRS.
a tier designation or some add-on to the tier process for highly developed transit corridors that cover multiple jurisdictions. And the planners agreed that it would be nice to reference this somewhere. And it's not worked out yet, but I think of Route 7, Montpelier Berry Road, like places where we need
Lots of
to
straw.
figure out what we're doing there and we want housing on those transit corridors.
Let's just do right
And some people call it strip repair. I don't like sort of
I
throwing
was gonna
value
say, it's a lot,
statements.
it's.
Yeah, I have to say, whatever's
Along the
happening
river
in
is
certain
a
places
plus.
on Route 7 is great. It's 4-story housing with commercial on the bottom. It makes so much sense, and I want more of that made easier.
I also still want a view of the Adirondacks every once in a while, you know, cruising along Route 7.
Well, and we're talking about we're not talking about Charlotte, you know,
You're
we're
only
talking
talking
about
about
South Burlington and Shelburne, where it's like 1-story Dunkin' Donuts, you know.
There's places in Brattleboro that.
That's in Brattleboro,
But,
that's what I'm talking about, yeah.
And there is a designation that it was a very interesting term. It was like
Transition?
places, yeah. So.
Is that what it was for? I thought transition was like transition to wilderness or something.
From our
It's
report,
from rural to less rural.
yeah, I'm sorry to say I'm blanking right now. I apologize.
It's okay. Transition looked like it was farther toward the rural side of.
But there was one that meant, let's do this differently. Like, you can't redevelop the way it is now.
Right.
So I think this
Yeah.
concept is definitely worth talking about and fleshing out. I
Our
think
chair is particularly enthusiastic.
Yeah,
Well, the planners agreed. It just feels like these things can't all look like circles. You know, it's not like we're just trying to build around a downtown. Most life is in straight lines between, you know, where someone lives and where they work.
and grids are nice too.
And grids are nice. So I don't know what's happening here,
Yeah.
but I hope people can help me.
Thank you for including it.
We will work on this. Maybe the planners can help too, because they like it.
We can discuss it.
Yeah,
All right.
let's do one more section and then I have a couple of follow-up announcements.
All right, so still on page 16, now section 15 starts the language related to zoning. So on page 16, here's a concept you talked about last year. It is the threshold for who can appeal a municipal zoning permit. So the language on page 16, any persons equal to a minimum of 10% of the most recent US Census Bureau population estimate of the municipality, who may be any combination of voters, residents, or real property owners within the municipality, get to appeal. So it's changing the threshold from 10 individuals within the municipality to 10% of the population.
So in Woodstock, it would require 300 people to sign on to something,
That would
to
really
appeal.
be interesting.
I'll say why I appreciate this is I feel like you have to do so much organizing to get a project, right? We've heard all these people have come out and vote 80% to support one housing development, and it feels unfair how imbalanced it is. You know, 10 people can disagree versus you have to have hundreds of people come out in support of a housing project, and it's a really imbalanced.
This might not be the right number, but I'm concerned about somebody not in the community that might or might not have a interest in the land that the project's being proposed on, funding, 10 people, because it's
Oh, right.
expensive
Yeah,
to take it all the way through the process.
right.
And,
Yeah, I think 10 people are easy to find
yes,
for what, you know, and just say, hey, you don't
Yeah,
like
it's
anything
good.
changing, you know? But you have to convince a group of people beyond just, you know,
Yeah.
very immediate particularized interests.
800
I
sounds like
actually-
a lot for Montpelier, but
Would be 800 for Montpelier.
yeah, what would it be for Burlington?
45.
Yeah, the question is whether the number is the right number. The
Right.
concept may be a good concept. 10%
That's fair.
strikes me in a lot of municipalities as a pretty high number and
Yeah.
requires an organized and costly process. We're concerned about the cost of Act 250. This actually adds to it in total.
This is municipal appeals.
Municipal,
just so
right.
This is municipal
Yeah,
zoning.
this is municipal,
Yeah.
right.
And actually, you could stand outside the grocery store and get these, you know, in a day or two.
Oh,
If you
10.
had a grocery store, Warren Johnson.
No, standing outside the
Oh.
grocery store is soliciting. You are not allowed to do it. I've been thrown out of campaigning. You cannot be handing out information that is considered soliciting and is not allowed.
Come to Woodstock.
So this is like, we understand the concept, Commissioner, and then we'll just noodle on this one.
Yeah, and I guess just to clarify, you know, this shouldn't add to the cost of developing the project. This is just gonna make it less likely that the appeal is gonna come, at least not from this, using this mechanism.
It addresses one of the things, of the three things we have wanted, the five of us have talked about, is limiting either the time, the number of people who can appeal, and or the skin in the game.
Right.
So we want to be sensitive to keeping access, you know, to justice, but we also want to make sure that it's
A
a
bit
community
democratic,
priority to
yeah.
stop this and not just the priority of one or two people.
But
Right.
the issue is getting a number that's in balance. that we're comfortable
So
with.
sure, I think we're all open
I
to
think
that.
5%.
I'd say that
might be better.
we put a pin in this and look at it 5 to 10%.
Just want to double check.
Good deal.
So is this also decisions of like the DRB, not just the administrative officer?
This is final.
Or whatever appropriate
I
municipal
bel-
panel?
Yes, I believe so.
But that's the intent, right? It's not just the administrative officer.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just gonna write it down. All right.
Yes, this area of Title 24 is a maze.
That's why we
Well,
have you.
thank you, Ellen, for
Just keep adding
holding our
on to it.
hands to this. I wanted to make a few announcements while we're live. One is, I just want people to know that I am talking to the Chair of Appropriations about the BAA housing related requests that have come over from the House. And ultimately, I think Senator Cummings can back me up, you know, Senate Appropriations has their own philosophy about what belongs in BAA. So right now, that's a very informal discussion, honoring appropriations philosophy and giving input on what we think is important, but what could be part of a larger housing discussion over the session, and what needs to happen 4 or 5 months before, which is, in my view, leans towards flood recovery and not necessarily towards other priorities that we have, because we are taking that money away from our ability to look at it in the budget.
Yeah.
We still have not submitted our studies thingy survey to GovOps.
I've got it.
I have your copy.
Okay.
I was I mean,
Yes, I
don't-
just want to let everyone know we're
That's
going to
fine.
submit it.
I gave
We're
up.
done. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're submitting. Allison, thank you for doing that. I was serious about the tenfold tour. Okay. I just want to hear from the committee. It could just be optional, but if there's 3 of us or more, we do have to warn it, but I don't want to make everybody come. I'm looking at like a Monday or a weekend, because I don't think we can lose committee time for that. So again, optional, but are people okay with us looking at a Monday or weekend, and Allison moving ahead with that?
yeah, and we're already moving ahead.
Great, okay.
On
Yeah.
looking at some Mondays, also to invite some other key players
Okay.
to enable
Okay.
tenfold to.
Weeks, exactly. So I think
So I
we're,
needed to chat with you about
Yeah.
that too.
so everyone's okay as Senator Carson proceeds with looking out for
Yes.
the committee time for tenfold, you don't have to come.
I
I'm
want
just
to, I want to
interested. You gotta
Easier
go
for
see
you and me.
Titan
I know.
Houses.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can go